Hey, welcome to BL Story. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really encourages my work and helps me bring you more stories. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy today's story. There are wounds that don't bleed. The kind that open slowly, almost gently, like a door you didn't know was closing behind you until the latch clicks shut and you're standing in the dark wondering how long the room has been empty. I'm having one of those moments right now. My name is Elias Vance, and I'm standing in my kitchen holding a manila envelope that arrived between a water bill and a takeout menu, as if the universe wanted to bury it in the ordinary. The return address reads Harlow and Associates, legal consultants. I don't know anyone at Harlow and Associates. I didn't open it expecting anything more than a mistake, some misdirected paperwork meant for a different Elias on a different floor of this building. But the letter inside begins, Dear Mr. Vance, regarding the estate of Mr. Callum Vance, deceased, and the pending transfer of property rights to Mr. Dorian Ashby and Mr. Soren Cole, jointly filed and notarized on the 14th of this month. I read it 3 times. Then I sit down on the kitchen floor because my legs simply stop working. Dorian Ashby, the man I have loved for 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days. The man who held me the night I buried my father and whispered against my temple that he wasn't going anywhere. The man who taught me that trust wasn't weakness, that letting someone in didn't mean handing them a key to the locks you'd spent years building. Soren Cole, my best friend. The person who called himself my brother in everything but blood. The person who showed up at my door at 2 a.m. when my father died with 2 cups of bad coffee and the simple, devastating decency of sitting beside me without saying a word. Their names sit together on legal paperwork, claiming ownership of something my father worked his entire life to build and left entirely to me. I don't cry, not yet. The shock is too clean, too surgical for tears. I just sit there on the cold tile floor, the letter trembling in my hands, reading their names over and over as if repetition might reveal some alternate meaning I'm missing, some innocent explanation that would make this make sense. It doesn't come, I should explain about Soren first because Soren is where the story begins. We met during our 2nd year of university, in a creative writing seminar neither of us wanted to be in. Our professor, a small woman with enormous glasses who seemed perpetually disappointed in the human race, made us pair up for a workshop exercise. Soren sat down across from me, dropped his notebook on the table and said without preamble, I can already tell you're going to be annoyingly good at this and I'm going to resent you for it. Might as well be friends now so it hurts less. I laughed so hard I knocked over my water bottle. That was Soren, disarming in the most specific, deliberate way. He had a talent for cutting through the careful distance people maintain around strangers and landing immediately in the comfortable middle ground of actual knowing. Within a week, we were finishing each other's sentences. Within a month, he had a key to my apartment. Within a year, his family had folded me into their holidays and Sunday dinners with a warmth that felt almost aggressive in its sincerity. His mother, Margaret Cole, called me sweetheart from the very first meeting, squeezing my cheeks like I was something she'd been waiting for. His older sister, Ivy, dragged me shopping and complained about her boyfriend and asked my opinion on things the way you only ask people you genuinely trust. His father clapped me on the shoulder and said any friend of Soren's is a Cole, and somehow it didn't sound like a line. I had grown up in a quiet house. My father was a good man, decent and steady but not expressive. My mother left when I was 7. I had learned early to be self-sufficient, to find warmth in small things, to not require too much from the people around me. And then Soren's family arrived and simply refused to let me be small about it. They insisted on more. They insisted on belonging. I was starving for it. I didn't realize how starving until I was already sitting at their table every other Sunday, already woven into their rhythms, already afraid to imagine life without it. That is the thing no one tells you about loneliness. It doesn't make you cautious, it makes you reckless. It makes you sign things without reading them, it makes you trust before you should. It makes you easy. Dorian came into my life through Soren, the way most things did in those years. It was a winter evening at Soren's apartment, the kind of gathering that starts as 3 people and slowly becomes 12, with coats piled on the bed and someone's playlist bleeding from the speaker. I was tucked into the corner of the couch with a glass of wine, perfectly content to observe when the front door opened and Soren called out from across the room, Elias, come here. There's someone you need to meet. Dorian Ashby was standing in the entryway unwinding a gray scarf, his cheeks still red from the cold, his hair slightly disheveled in the particular way that looks intentional but isn't. He was tall, He had the kind of face that you look at once and then have to look away from and then look back at before you understand what it is you're seeing. "This is Dorian," Soren said, slinging an arm around my shoulders with proprietary ease. "He's brilliant, he's annoyingly humble about it, and I've been trying to get you two in the same room for months. You're welcome." Dorian smiled, not a performance of a smile, a real one, slow and slightly self-conscious. He offered his hand. "I've heard a lot about you," he said. His voice was quiet, the kind that makes you lean in slightly to catch it. "Soren talks about you like you're the only person he's ever respected." "That's terrifying," I said. He laughed, and something shifted in the room, or maybe just in me. We talked for 3 hours in that corner while the party moved around us. He was a structural engineer with a secret obsession with 19th-century Gothic literature. He had a younger brother he clearly adored and never quite said enough about. He asked questions and actually waited for the answers. He made me feel, in the specific unsettling way of people who are genuinely paying attention, like what I said mattered. I walked home that night in the January cold feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Seen. By spring, we were together. By summer, Soren was making speeches at dinner about how he'd orchestrated the whole thing and deserved significant credit. By autumn, I had introduced Dorian to my father, and my father, a man of few words, had shaken his hand and said good, in the particular tone he reserved for things he actually meant. It was the closest to a blessing I could have hoped for. Dorian was careful with me in the way that people are careful with things they understand to be fragile, not breakable, but worth protecting. He never rushed. He never crowded. He gave me space when I needed it and stayed when I needed that instead, and somehow knew which was which without being asked. I used to think that was love. I used to think that quality of attention was evidence of something real. Now I wonder if it was just precision, the specific, practiced attentiveness of someone who needs you to stay open. My father died 8 months ago. Callum Vance, 59 years old, a quiet man who built a modest empire in commercial real estate over 30 years of careful, unfashionable patience. He left behind a house, 3 properties, and an estate valued at considerably more than I had understood, because he was not the kind of man who talked about money. He left it all to me, his only son. The letter from his solicitor was brief and matter-of-fact in the way my father had always been, and I sat in the solicitor's office with Dorian beside me and cried in a way I hadn't cried since I was 7 years old watching a taxi pull out of our driveway. Soren came to the funeral. His entire family came. His mother held my hand through the service and his father helped carry the arrangements. Ivy sat beside me at the reception and didn't leave my side for hours. It was, in every visible way, what love looks like. Dorian stayed the night, and the next night, and the one after that. He cooked bad pasta and made good coffee and held me in the dark when the grief came sideways at 3 a.m. the way grief does. He said more than once, "I'm not going anywhere, Eli. Whatever you need, I'm here." I believed him. I believed all of them. The warning signs, in retrospect, arranged themselves with almost insulting clarity. Dorian pulling away in the months after the estate was settled. Shorter texts, vaguer plans, the particular quality of distraction that you tell yourself is stress, and tell yourself is tiredness, and tell yourself is not what it clearly is. I mentioned it to Soren over drinks one evening, nursing a beer in our usual bar, the noise around us thick enough that I had to lean in to be heard. "Do you think Dorian's been different lately?" I asked. "More distant, I keep getting this feeling something's changed." Soren swirled his drink, his expression easy, unbothered. "You always do this, Eli. You catastrophize. He loves you. Some people just go quiet when they're busy. It doesn't mean anything." "I know, but it feels like..." "It feels like nothing," Soren said firmly. "Stop looking for problems where there aren't any. You deserve to be happy. Let yourself be happy." I nodded. I let myself believe him. Because that is what loneliness teaches you to do. It teaches you to trust the person holding your hand more than the feeling in your chest, because the feeling in your chest has been wrong before, has led you to empty rooms and locked doors, and maybe, this time you are just overreacting. I wasn't overreacting. I know that now, sitting on my kitchen floor, the legal letter in my hands, Dorian's name printed next to Soren's in clean official type. I wasn't catastrophizing. I wasn't manufacturing problems. I was watching something end and being told to look away. I called Dorian first, The line rings twice and then goes to voicemail. I call again. Same. On the third attempt, it doesn't ring at all, just transfers directly to the message service. I sit with the phone pressed against my ear for a long moment after the beep, but I don't leave a message. What would I say? I call Soren, it rings once, then nothing. I try again, the call doesn't connect. They've both blocked me. If you are not subscribed now, please hit that subscribe button. It's completely free. Let's back to the story. The realization comes not as a shock, but as a kind of terrible completion, the last piece of a shape I didn't want to recognize sliding into place. This was planned. Whatever this is, whatever the letter means, it was not an accident. You do not block someone by accident. You do not appear together on legal documents claiming ownership of an estate you have no right to by accident. This was deliberate, methodical, patient. I sit on the floor for a long time. Then slowly I get up. I don't go to Soren's apartment, not that night. Something holds me back, some instinct that feels new or maybe very old, sharpened into usefulness by the specific quality of this pain. I don't go. I sit at my kitchen table with the letter spread flat in front of me and I think. My father left me the estate outright. The solicitor who handled the transfer was a man named Gerald Pace, quiet and meticulous, who I have met exactly 3 times. The documents are held in a legal firm downtown. The physical deed is in a fireproof safe in my study, biometric lock, no exceptions, because my father was the kind of man who believed in protecting what mattered. Was in the safe. I cross the apartment in 8 steps and press my thumb to the reader. The safe opens. The deed is gone. I stand very still for a moment, looking at the empty space where the most important document I own should be. I breathe in. I breathe out. And then, with a clarity that feels almost frightening in how calm it is, I pick up my phone and dial a number I haven't called in over a year. It rings 3 times. Elias Vance, says the voice on the other end, and even through the phone I can hear the particular quality of someone who is never quite surprised. It's late. I know, I say. I need your help, Felix. I think I've been robbed. A pause, then tell me everything. Felix Reese. This requires some explanation. Felix is 34, 2 years older than me, a litigation attorney who operates in the specific intersection of financial crime and civil fraud that makes him simultaneously very expensive and very necessary. I met him through my father, who used his firm for a property dispute 6 years ago. Felix sat across from my father in a conference room and was so precisely, ruthlessly competent that my father, who trusted almost no one professionally, trusted him immediately. He also, from the moment I walked into that conference room at 26, flirted with me in a way that was so controlled and deliberate it felt less like flirtation and more like a statement of intent. Not aggressive, not inappropriate, just present, like he had placed something on the table between us and was content to leave it there indefinitely. I had a boyfriend at the time, then I didn't. Then I met Dorian. Felix and I had maintained something that existed in the outer atmosphere of my life, occasional professional contact, the rare dinner when I needed advice, a quality of conversation that always left me slightly unsettled in a way I didn't examine too closely. He never pushed, he never withdrew either, he simply remained, steady and watchful like something that has learned the patience of permanent orbit. I had not called him since my father died. Tonight I call him, and he answers in 3 rings, and his voice is the first thing in hours that doesn't feel like standing on a surface that might give way. Come over, Felix says, now bring the letter. I come. His apartment is in a part of the city that communicates wealth without announcing it, old building, high ceilings, the kind of quiet that costs money. He opens the door in a dark sweater and reading glasses he doesn't immediately remove, which means he was working. He takes one look at my face and steps aside without a word. Inside, the apartment is warm and ordered in the particular way of people who live alone and are fine with it. He pours 2 glasses of something amber and sets one in front of me, sits, looks at me across the table with that specific attention of his, the kind that misses very little. Tell me, he says. I tell him everything. He listens without interrupting, his expression moving through careful, professional attention into something sharper, darker, as I describe the letter, the blocked calls, the empty safe. By the time I finish, he has set down his glass and his hands are flat on the table. The notary stamp, he says, on the letter. What firm? Harlow and Associates. Something crosses his face. brief, controlled. I know that firm. They've appeared in 3 cases I've looked at in the past 2 years, always adjacent to property fraud, never the main actor. He looks at me. How much did they know about your estate, Dorian and Soren? Dorian knew the general shape of it. My father mentioned it when he was sick. Soren, I stop. Something cold moves through me. Soren knew more. I told him after the funeral, the specific value, the address of the properties I was grieving, I wasn't thinking about. About who was listening, Felix finishes quietly. The silence stretches. I press my hands flat against my thighs to stop them shaking. What do? I ask. Felix is quiet for a moment. Then he looks at me with those gray eyes of his, and what I see in them is not pity. It is something much more useful. You let me work, he says, and you don't speak to either of them again until I tell you to. A pause. Can you do that? Yes, I say. Good. He reaches across the table and very briefly, very precisely, covers my hand with his, just for a moment. Then he withdraws it and picks up his pen. Then we begin. First grief when Dorian's absence was fresh and Soren's silence sat on my chest like something physical. This was different, sharper, the kind of alertness that comes when hurt hardens into purpose. Felix wasted no time. The morning after I showed up at his door, he called before I had finished my first coffee. His voice was already moving at the particular velocity he reserved for cases he had decided to take seriously, which I would come to understand meant cases that had made him angry. I need you to write down every conversation you remember having with either of them about your father's estate. Dates if you have them, approximate if not. Every detail. Don't filter for relevance, let me decide what matters. Good morning to you too, I said. A pause. Good morning, Elias, now write it down. I wrote it down. Over the next 48 hours, Felix operated with the quiet efficiency of someone dismantling a structure they have already fully mapped. He pulled publicly available records. He contacted colleagues. He made phone calls in the early evening that I was not privy to, calling me back afterward with updates delivered in the clipped, precise shorthand of someone accustomed to translating complexity into action. On the second day, he called at 7 in the evening and said, "Come over, I have something to show you." I came. He had cleared the dining table and covered it in organized paper. Printed documents, handwritten notes in his narrow, angular script, photographs that appeared to be pulled from public filings. He stood at the head of the table with his sleeves rolled up and his glasses pushed up on his forehead, which I had begun to understand was his working configuration, and gestured for me to sit. Soren Cole, he began, setting a file in front of me. 29 years old, works in property development, which you knew. What you didn't know, he was a junior associate at a firm called Meridian Group 3 years ago. Meridian collapsed under a financial investigation. Soren was not charged, but he was questioned. The investigation found evidence of client funds being redirected into personal accounts. The paper trail was clean enough that nothing stuck to him specifically. I stared at the document. You think he was involved? I think the pattern is consistent, Felix said carefully. Soren left Meridian 6 weeks before the investigation became public. He had inside knowledge. That kind of timing is not coincidence. He slid another sheet toward me. His sister, Ivy. I looked up Ivy. 2 years ago, a man named Thomas Whitfield filed a civil claim against a woman matching Ivy Cole's description, though the defendant is listed under a different name. The claim alleged that he signed over rights to a property after being manipulated into a relationship specifically for that purpose. The case was settled out of court. Very quietly, very quickly. The room felt smaller. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes for a moment. The whole family. Not necessarily the parents, Felix said, and his voice was precise, not gentle exactly, but measured in a way that felt like care. I don't have evidence connecting Margaret or Edmund Cole to anything specific, but the children, he paused. The pattern is there, and it's practiced. They knew what they were doing when they took me in, I said. The words came out very flat. I wasn't sure what I had expected to feel saying them. Something bigger, maybe. Instead, there was just this quiet, terrible clarity. The Sunday dinners, Margaret calling me sweetheart, all of it was. A preparation, Felix said. He sat down across from me. Elias, I need you to hear something, and I need you to actually hear it, not just process it intellectually. He waited until I met his eyes. This was not a reflection of your judgment. These people are professionals. They identify targets, they study them, they construct exactly the kind of environment the target needs most. In your case, that was family, belonging. The specific warmth of being chosen by people who seem to have no reason to choose you. A pause. They were very good at what they did. That's not a character flaw in you. It's evidence of how deliberate they were. I said nothing for a long moment. You've thought about this kind of case before, I said finally. I've seen it before, he said, not exactly this, but close enough. Something in the way he said it made me not ask further, not yet. Dorian's file came 2 days later. Felix called me at midday, his voice carrying the particular quality of controlled anger I was learning to recognize, a flatness that was denser than calm. I need you to come by this evening. The Dorian Ashby situation is more complicated than I anticipated. Complicated how? Come by, I'll explain it properly. I came by. Felix opened the door and handed me a glass of water before I had even sat down, which I would later identify as his tell for bad news. He sat across from me and opened a second file. Dorian Ashby is not his original name, Felix said. He changed it legally 5 years ago. His given name is Dorian Marsh. Before the name change, there are 2 incidents, one in Edinburgh, one in Bristol. Both involve men who were in relationships with him. Both involve significant financial transfers that were later disputed. One was settled. One is still technically open because the plaintiff ran out of resources to continue pursuing it. I sat very still. He's done this before, I said. Yes. To other people like me. Felix looked at me steadily. To people who trusted him, yes. I thought about the night my father died. I thought about Dorian's hands in my hair and his voice against my temple saying I'm not going anywhere. I thought about how specifically, how surgically comforting he had been. How he had known exactly when to be present and exactly when to give me room, like someone following a map. He was sent to me, I said slowly, by Soren. Soren introduced us. Soren orchestrated the whole thing. That is my current hypothesis, Felix said. Yes. How long do you think they were planning it? Based on the timeline, Felix paused, seeming to weigh something. At least from shortly after you told Soren about the estate's value, which you said was approximately 6 months after your father's diagnosis. I did the math in my head, my chest tightened. That means that the friendship with Soren may have been genuine initially, Felix said, reading my face with that precise attention of his. It often is in cases like this. The affection isn't necessarily entirely manufactured, but at some point a calculation was made, and after that calculation everything was instrumental. I stood up and walked to the window. The city below moved in its usual indifferent way, traffic and light and the ordinary machinery of other people's evenings. I pressed my forehead very briefly against the cool glass. Do you know what the worst part is? I said. Tell me. I miss him. I still miss Soren. Even now, even knowing this, part of me misses the person I thought he was. I turned back to face Felix. Is that pathetic? Felix considered me for a moment, not quickly, not with the reflex reassurance of someone trying to make you feel better, actually considered. No, he said, you're grieving someone who doesn't exist. That's still grief. It doesn't have to make sense to be real. I looked at him for a moment. You're surprisingly decent at this for a litigator. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. Don't tell anyone, it'll ruin my professional reputation. The call from Soren came on a Thursday. I had not expected it. Felix had told me they'd likely go quiet once they understood the legal transfer was being processed, which would make my silence seem like acceptance. I had followed his instructions, no contact, no reaction, a stillness that I hoped read as resignation. But Soren called. I stared at the name on my screen, that name I had looked at hundreds of times over years of friendship, and felt the particular vertigo of holding 2 entirely contradictory truths at once. I knew who he was now, and I remembered who I had believed him to be, and the gap between those 2 things was wide enough to fall into. I answered. Felix had said, if either of them contacts you, keep them talking, don't confront, don't accuse, let them think they have the upper hand. People who believe they've already won become careless. Eli, Soren said, his voice was warm. That easy, familiar warmth he had always had, the voice that had talked me through dark nights and made me laugh until I couldn't breathe. "I've been thinking about you. Are you okay?" Getting there, I said, my own voice surprised me, steady, calm. "I know it's been strange, the whole situation." A careful pause. "I'm sorry it happened the way it did. Dorian and I, it was never something we planned. These things just happen," I finished. "Yeah," he exhaled. "You deserve to be happy too, Eli. I hope you know that." "I appreciate that," I said. "And the legal stuff?" His voice shifted, just slightly, a fraction of increased casual precision that I would not have caught a month ago. "That's all being sorted, right? No complications." "Should there be?" I asked. No, I want things to be clean between us, no bad blood, we can still be." "I know," I said, "I want that too." Silence, then satisfied. "Good, that's really good, Eli." We said goodbye. I hung up and sat with the phone in my hand for a long moment. Then I called Felix. "He's checking on the transfer," I said. "I know, I've been watching the legal inquiry activity on the processing status. He checked it himself this morning as well." A pause. "You did well." "Don't," I said. "Don't what?" "Patronize me." A longer pause. "I wasn't, I meant it." His voice had shifted, the professional edge softened slightly. "Elias, what you just did took more composure than most people could manage. I meant what I said." I breathed out slowly. "Thank you." "Get some sleep," he said, "we're getting close." The next piece came from an unexpected direction. I had returned to work. My studio, a small architectural visualization firm I had been quietly building for 5 years, had been running on autopilot in my absence, my associate Mara holding things together with the particular competent grace of someone who should probably have my job. I came back because Felix said normalcy was important, and because I needed somewhere to put my hands and my eyes that wasn't my apartment with its empty safe and its legal correspondence. I was in the studio late on a Wednesday when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. "Elias Vance," the voice was male, cautious. "You don't know me, my name is Thomas Whitfield." I went very still. "Ivy Cole," I said. A sharp intake of breath. "You know about that?" "I know some of it." "Then you know what they do." His voice had a quality I recognized, not just anger, something beneath the anger, the particular rawness of someone who has been made to feel foolish by people they trusted. "I found your name through a contact. Someone working your case. I'm not trying to interfere, he paused. "I wanted to tell you that you're not alone in this, that's all. I wanted someone to know that when I went through it, there was no one to tell me that." I sat down slowly at my drafting desk. "How long ago?" I asked. 2 years. I lost a property. Modest compared to what I understand your situation involves, but it was mine. It was the only thing my grandfather left me." A pause. "They're systematic, Mr. Vance. They choose people who are isolated, who have recently lost someone, who have assets and no one watching over those assets. They move in stages. The friendship first, then the love interest, then the crisis, then the signing." "The signing," I repeated. "Did they use alcohol?" Something cold moved through me. "I don't know yet. I don't remember signing anything." "In my case, it was a dinner, a celebration, they called it. I was drinking more than I realized. The paper appeared and Ivy said it was a co-investment form. I trusted her." His voice was very controlled. By the time I understood what I'd signed, it had been filed. "Thomas," I said, "would you be willing to speak with my attorney?" A pause, then yes, I've been waiting for someone to ask. I brought Thomas Whitfield's name to Felix that evening. Felix sat back in his chair and looked at me for a moment with an expression I hadn't seen from him before. Something that lived between professional satisfaction and something warmer, something he didn't immediately categorize or put away. "You found him yourself," he said. "He found me, but yes." "Elias?" Felix leaned forward. "This is significant. A prior victim willing to testify with a documented case that establishes pattern. This is the architecture of a prosecution." He was quiet for a moment. "This changes things considerably." "Good," I said. He looked at me steadily. "How are you?" The question surprised me with its directness. Not how is the case going or how are you holding up with the legal process, just how are you? "Angry," I said honestly. "Mostly just angry now. The grief is still there, but the anger is louder." "That's useful," he said. "You sound pleased about my anger." I'm pleased it's replaced the paralysis, he said. Anger moves, grief sits. Right now we need you moving. He paused. And after this is over, I intend to take you to dinner and let you feel whatever you want at whatever volume you want. But for now, yes, I'm pleased about the anger. I looked at him for a long moment. That statement, the dinner, the after this is over, sat between us with a specificity that was new, or not new exactly, just more declared than it had previously been. Is that professional or personal? I asked. Dinner is traditionally personal, he said, without expression, though something in his eyes was doing something different. I said nothing for a moment, then, ask me again when it's over. I will, he said, I have considerable patience. I've noticed. He allowed himself a small, private smile and picked up his pen. The event that broke things open came not from Felix's legal maneuvering, but from a collision of ordinary life and terrible timing. I was buying coffee near my studio when I heard Ivy Cole's voice carrying from 2 aisles over in the small supermarket attached to the cafe. I froze. Felix's voice in my head, don't engage, don't react, move away. I turned to leave. But I heard my name. Elias honestly still thinks it's processing, Ivy was saying, her voice pitched low but not low enough. I stood very still behind a display of overpriced olive oil. Soren spoke to him. He bought the whole thing, poor lamb. A second voice, one I didn't recognize, and the attorney. What attorney? He doesn't have one, Soren checked. He's been completely passive. I kept my breathing measured. Dorian says we should move the final filing up, before the end of the month. Fine, the notary is already arranged. Once it's filed, he has no standing. The estate transfers completely. Ivy paused. He'll figure it out eventually, but by then there's nothing to dispute. We've been careful. You always are, said the second voice, and there was in it something that sounded almost like admiration, which was the most nauseating thing I had heard in weeks. I left the store without my coffee. I sat in my car with my hands on the wheel and breathed steadily in and out until the urge to go back in and say something destructive had passed. Then I called Felix. They're moving the final filing up, I said. End of the month, Dorian is pushing for it. A pause, longer than his usual pauses. How did you get this? I happen to be in the same supermarket. Another pause. Did they see you? No. You're certain? Yes. All right. His voice shifted into that particular gear of focused urgency. Then we move first. I've been waiting until we had enough to be decisive, but this changes the timeline. I'm calling the Financial Crimes Unit tonight. We have Thomas Whitfield's testimony, the pattern evidence on Ivy, the fraud documentation on Dorian, and the coercion argument on the signing. It's enough. A beat. Elias. Yeah. It's enough, he said again, and something in how he said it made it mean more than just the legal case. The next 3 days were the strangest of my life. Felix moved with a speed and precision that was genuinely extraordinary to watch. He operated the way I imagined certain natural forces do, not loudly, not dramatically, but with an absolute and inevitable momentum. He coordinated with the financial crimes investigator assigned to Nathan's Bristol case, who had been quietly building something on Dorian for 18 months. He filed an emergency injunction on the estate transfer citing evidence of coercion and fraud. He prepared Thomas Whitfield's deposition. He contacted 2 other individuals who appeared in the civil records adjacent to the Cole family's history, both of whom agreed to provide statements. He called me each evening with a precise, efficient update that always ended with a question that had nothing to do with the case. Have you eaten today? Or are you sleeping? Or once simply, what did you do today that wasn't about this? I had to think hard about that last one. If you are not subscribed yet now, please hit that subscribe button. It's completely free. Let's back to the story. I finished a visualization project for a client, I said. A residential build in the north of the city. The client wanted it to look like light was the primary material. I spent 3 hours on the way afternoon sun hits a specific staircase. Did you get it right? I think so. It's hard to know until you see it in real space, but on screen it looks, I paused, finding the word, true. True, Felix repeated, not beautiful. Beautiful isn't enough, beautiful can be false, true is harder. Silence on the line for a moment. Yes, he said quietly, it is. I wasn't sure we were still talking about the staircase. On the fourth day, Felix called at 8 in the morning. The injunction was granted, he said. The transfer is frozen. Nothing moves until the investigation is complete. A pause. It's done, Elias. The estate is protected. I sat down on the edge of my bed. The morning light came through the curtains in long, pale lines. What happens now? I asked. The investigation proceeds. Dorian will likely be formally charged within the week based on what the Financial Crimes Unit has. The civil case against the Cole family for the fraudulent signing will take longer, but the evidence is strong. You will almost certainly prevail. His voice was careful, measured. It will be a difficult few months, but you will prevail. And Soren. A pause. He was knowing and deliberate. His exposure is significant. I thought about Soren's voice on the phone. I hope you know you deserve to be happy. I thought about the night he sat with me while I cried for my father. I thought about two incompatible people who were somehow the same person and the exhausting, ongoing grief of knowing that. Okay, I said. Are you all right? I will be, I said, and I meant it. Not as a performance, not as the kind of thing you say because it's expected. I meant it the way you mean things when they come from somewhere solid. Yes, Felix said quietly, you will. The wedding was in 6 days. I had received, improbably, an invitation addressed to me in handwriting I recognized as Soren's, folded inside a card that read, "We'd love for you to be there. No hard feelings." The audacity of it was, in its own way, almost impressive. They still believed they had won. They still believed I was exactly what they had always taken me for. I looked at the invitation for a long time. Then I called Felix. I want to go, I said. A long silence. Elias. I know what you're going to say. Do you? You're going to say it's unnecessary, that the legal case is in motion, that I don't need to be there. All of those things are true, Felix said, and yet, I agreed. I want to look them in the eye. I want to be the one who ends it, in person, in the room they built thinking I would sit in it as a witness to my own defeat. Another silence, then quietly, I'll come with you. Felix. I'll come with you, he said again, and his voice had a quality that was not professional, not strategic, simply, I will not let you walk into that room alone. I closed my eyes briefly. All right, I said. The morning of the wedding arrived the way significant mornings often do, unremarkably. Gray light through the curtains, the distant sound of the city assembling itself. My coffee going slightly cold because I kept forgetting to drink it while I stood at the window thinking about nothing specific and everything at once. Felix arrived at 10. He knocked twice precisely, and when I opened the door he was dressed in charcoal gray, a dark tie, his hair neat in that careful way that suggested he had thought about it without wanting to appear to have thought about it. He looked at me for a moment, taking in whatever my face was doing, and then he stepped inside without being asked and set a paper bag on my kitchen counter. Eat something, he said. I'm not hungry. That wasn't a question? He opened the bag and removed a pastry wrapped in paper, setting it on a plate with the domestic efficiency of someone who has decided a thing will happen and is simply implementing it. He glanced at me. Sit down, Elias. I sat, I ate. The pastry was from the good bakery 3 blocks from his apartment, which meant he had gone there this morning specifically, which meant he had thought about this, about me, before the day had properly started. I didn't say anything about it. Neither did he. We sat at my kitchen table in a silence that was, somehow, not uncomfortable. Outside the window the city made its ordinary sounds. I looked at the plate in front of me and thought about how strange it was, the way care arrived. Not always in dramatic gestures. Sometimes in a paper bag from a good bakery. Sometimes in someone sitting across from you while you ate without requiring anything from you in return. Are you ready? Felix asked eventually. I thought about the question with its full weight. No, I said honestly, but I'm going anyway. He nodded once. Good, he said, that's the only kind of ready that matters. The venue was a converted estate house 40 minutes outside the city. Old stone, formal gardens, the kind of place that communicates permanence and substance, chosen, I understood now, with deliberate care. Soren would have selected it. He had always had an instinct for environments that made people feel the gravity of things, that made promises feel more binding, that made a room feel like the kind of place where everything that happens inside it must be true. He was good at that. I had always admired it. It was one of the first things I had loved about him. We pulled into the gravel drive and Felix cut the engine. For a moment, we sat in the quiet of the car. Through the windscreen, I could see guests arriving in clusters, dressed in the muted palettes of people who have been told the aesthetic is understated elegance. Everything looked like a photograph of something real. The investigators are positioned, Felix said quietly. He wasn't looking at me, watching the guests. They'll move when I send the signal, not before. Which is when? When you've said what you need to say. He turned to look at me then. You have the floor, Elias. This is yours. I'm just here to make sure it lands correctly. I looked at him for a moment. At the particular quality of steadiness he carried, the way he occupied space without crowding it, the way he had been, for these weeks, exactly what I needed without once making me feel the weight of needing it. Felix, I said. Yes. After this, the dinner you mentioned. Something in his expression shifted, very slightly, very controlled. Yes. I'm saying yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then, with the particular precision of someone choosing their words with full awareness of what they mean, I'll make a reservation. I almost laughed. That's all you're going to say? We're about to walk into a room full of people who tried to rob you, he said, a careful quality of warmth threading through the professional calm. Save the rest for dinner. I did laugh then, briefly, genuinely. All right, I said, let's go. The ceremony was held in the main hall, high ceilings, tall windows, afternoon light falling in long columns across rows of white chairs. A string quartet played something tasteful. Flowers everywhere, pale and expensive. The room smelled of lilies and new upholstery and the particular pleasant unreality of a very well-dressed occasion. I found my seat in the second row. Felix sat beside me, close enough that his arm almost touched mine, distant enough to be appropriate. He had a wedding program open on his knee that he was not reading. I had one too. I looked at Dorian's name printed inside it next to Soren's and felt something that was not quite anything I had a name for. Not grief exactly. Not rage exactly. Something older and quieter that lived underneath both of those. Soren appeared at the front of the room first. He looked well. That was the terrible, absurd thing. He looked well and comfortable and handsome in his dark suit, and he was smiling at the guests with that easy, magnetic warmth that had been the first thing I had loved about him and was now the thing I understood most completely. He caught my eye across the room. Something flickered, very fast, there and gone, guilt perhaps, or something adjacent to it, or maybe just surprise that I had come at all. He nodded, small, careful. I nodded back. Then Dorian walked in. I had not seen him in weeks. He looked, as he always had, precisely put together. The kind of man whose appearance requires effort that never shows as effort. He took his place beside Soren at the front of the room, and for a moment their hands found each other, an instinctive reaching that probably was real, the way certain things can be real even when they are built on a foundation of deliberate harm. I watched it and felt nothing I hadn't already felt, which meant the worst of it had already been processed somewhere in the weeks of cold kitchens and legal documents in Felix's precise, patient voice on the phone at 11 in the evening. The officiant began. I sat and listened. The words of the ceremony moved over me like weather. I watched the faces of the people around me, Soren's family in the front row, Margaret Cole pressing a handkerchief to her eye, Edmund Cole with his hand on his wife's knee. Ivy seated on the aisle, wearing a half-smile of proprietary satisfaction that had nothing to do with happiness and everything to do with a job going according to plan. Felix's hand found mine briefly on the armrest between us, just his fingers, just for a moment, steadying, then gone. I breathed in, I breathed out. I thought about my father, about his quiet house and his steady hands and the careful, unfashionable patience with which he had built everything he left me. I thought about what it would mean to let people take that. To sit in this row, in this room, and be the thing they thought I was. The gullible orphan who signed his inheritance away in a drunken declaration of love, and would now sit politely clapping while the people who took it exchanged vows. The officiant said, if anyone present knows of any reason these two should not be joined. The formality of it, the beautiful, absurd formality of it. I stood up. The room shifted the way rooms do when something unexpected happens. A collective intake, a turning of heads, the particular silence that arrives when the social script goes off route and no one knows yet what follows. I felt it all and I stood in it and I was calm. I'm sorry to interrupt, I said, which was technically true in that I was in fact sorry for the interruption to the otherwise pleasant afternoon, though not for much else. Soren's face had gone still. Dorian's eyes were sharp and calculating. Ivy was already straightening in her seat, preparing something. My name is Elias Vance, I said, loud enough to carry. I'm listed in the program as a guest and a friend of the groom. Both of those words need some revision. Elias, Soren's voice was controlled, a warning wrapped in my name. This isn't the place. I disagree, I said. I think this is exactly the place. You sent me an invitation. You put my name on your guest list. You wanted me in this room. I paused, so here I am. I reached into my jacket and removed a folded document, the copy of the original legal letter, the one that had arrived between a water bill and a takeout menu on an ordinary afternoon, and rearranged everything. I held it up where the room could see it. 3 weeks ago, I received paperwork claiming that I had signed over the rights to my father's estate to Soren Cole. The estate my father spent 30 years building and left entirely to me. I kept my voice even, not performative, not theatrical, just true. I didn't sign it. The signature on that document was obtained through coercion, and the notary stamp attached to it is fraudulent. The murmuring started low and spread fast, the way fire does in dry conditions. He's lying, Dorian said, his voice hard. He had moved slightly in front of Soren, an instinct. He's upset about the relationship. He's making this into something it isn't. Dorian Marsh, I said. The name landed in the room like something thrown. I watched his face change. That's your name, isn't it? The one before the one you use now. I let the silence sit for a moment. The financial crimes investigator in Bristol has been using it in their ongoing case for approximately 18 months. Someone in the third row said something to the person beside them. Margaret Cole had lowered her handkerchief. Edmund's hand had gone very still on his wife's knee. Felix stood up. He did it without drama, without announcement, simply rising to stand beside me in a way that made the room understand immediately that he was not a casual guest. He had that quality, the ability to communicate authority without performing it. Felix Reese litigation, he said, smooth, absolute. I represent Mr. Vance. I have filed an emergency injunction on the estate transfer this week, which has been granted. The transfer is frozen pending a full investigation into fraud and coercion. He reached into his own jacket and produced a document. I also have here a statement from Thomas Whitfield, who I believe is known to at least one member of this family. Ivy stood up so fast her chair scraped back. This is, you can't just, she looked at Soren, something desperate and urgent in her expression. Sit down, Ivy, Felix said, not unkindly but with a finality that was physical in its effect. She sat. I continued. I'm not doing this for revenge, I said, which was mostly true. I'm doing it because this family has done this before to Thomas Whitfield, to at least 2 other people whose names are now part of a civil filing. They identify people who are alone, who have recently lost someone, who have something worth taking and no one watching over it. They construct exactly the environment those people need most. For me, it was family, belonging. My voice stayed even. They were very good at it. I want that acknowledged in this room, in front of the people who smiled at their wedding and believed they were decent. The room was very quiet. Margaret Cole was not dabbing her eyes anymore. She was sitting very still, her face a complicated map of something I didn't have the energy to try to read. Soren took a step toward me. Elias, please. And his voice even now had that quality, that specific warmth. Whatever you think happened, whatever he's told you, it doesn't have to be like this. We can talk about this, you and me, like we always have. I looked at him for a long moment. The person I had believed he was lived somewhere in the architecture of his face, in the particular way he carried himself, in the voice that had talked me through grief and made me laugh, and told me I was overthinking and told me I was loved. I looked for him and found only the outline of where he had been, which was its own specific loss, the kind you don't get to mourn properly because it was never real. There is no you and me, Soren, I said quietly. There never was. There was you and a version of me you constructed to be useful. I'm not that. He said nothing. I hope you understand that, I said. Not for my sake, just because I think somewhere in there you might actually want to. I folded the document, I put it back in my pocket. And then the doors at the back of the hall opened and 2 officers walked in, their presence cutting through the remaining noise the way a clear note cuts through static. What followed was not cinematic. It was administrative and ungainly and real, the way justice usually is when it actually arrives. Less a dramatic reckoning and more a series of procedural steps happening in a room full of people in good clothes who had expected an entirely different afternoon. Dorian was informed of the formal investigation and asked to accompany the officers for questioning. He argued briefly, with the particular entitled anger of someone who has always expected to be believed. He was not believed. He left the room between two officers, his jaw tight, his eyes finding mine once on the way out with an expression I couldn't entirely decode, something between anger and something almost like recognition. A civil order was served to Soren relating to the fraudulent notarization, which Felix handled with the brisk efficiency of someone who has been preparing this particular moment for 3 weeks. Ivy left the room of her own accord during the procedural commotion, slipping out a side door with the practiced smoothness of someone who has exited situations before. She would not get far. Felix had anticipated this. Soren stood at the front of the room, where the officiant had been, where the flowers still stood in their expensive arrangements, where the string quartet had packed their instruments quietly and waited. He stood there and looked at the room emptying around him, and for a moment his face showed something unguarded and raw that I had not seen from him before. Not guilt exactly, something lonelier than guilt. I watched him for a moment. Then I looked away. Felix found me outside in the formal garden 20 minutes later. I was sitting on a stone bench near a dormant rose bed, my jacket unbuttoned, my tie loosened, looking at the late afternoon sky, which had gone the particular color of old pewter that means rain is considering arriving. The sounds from inside the house had settled into something lower and more procedural. Felix sat down beside me. He had removed his own jacket. He held it folded across his knee, and for a moment we both looked at the sky without speaking, which was, I had come to understand, one of his particular qualities. He did not fill silence. He inhabited it. Thomas Whitfield called, he said finally. He watched the live stream we set up for him. He said to tell you, Felix paused, something shifting in his voice. He said to tell you he finally feels like it's over. I nodded slowly. Good. The injunction will hold. The investigation is formally open. Your father's estate is protected. He was quiet for a moment. It will take time, months likely before civil proceedings conclude, but the outcome is not in doubt. Thank you, I said. Elias. Felix, thank you. I turned to look at him, not as my attorney, as the person who answered the phone at 10 at night and told me to come over and listen to all of it and then got to work. Thank you for that. He looked at me with those gray eyes that missed very little. You would have found a way through this without me, he said. Maybe, I said, but I didn't have to. The silence stretched between us, different from the silence of the previous weeks, lighter in its texture. The garden smelled of cold stone and the particular clean edge of air before rain. The dinner, Felix said. Yes. Are you still? Yes, I said clearly without qualification. Something opened in his expression, very slightly, the way a window opens in a room that has been closed for too long, just enough to change the air. Saturday, he said. There's a restaurant I've been meaning to try, small, very good, the kind of place where they don't hurry you. That sounds, I said, like exactly what I need. He nodded, didn't look away. Me too, he said, and it carried the weight of something that had been true for considerably longer than the weeks of this particular crisis. I thought about patience, about the specific discipline of someone who places something on the table and is content to leave it there, who does not push, does not withdraw, who simply remains with a steadiness that turns out in the end to be its own kind of declaration. You've been waiting a long time, I said. I have considerable patience, he said. You may remember my mentioning it. I do, I said. I also remember thinking at the time that you were slightly insufferable. And now? I looked at him, at the careful, warm, exasperating, precise person who had answered the phone and built a case and brought me pastries and stood up in that room beside me, and said I represent Mr. Vance with an authority that had felt, in that moment, like being held. Still slightly insufferable, I said, but I'm beginning to think that's one of your better qualities. His smile arrived the way his smiles always did, slowly and with full intention. High praise, he said. Don't push it. I went back inside once more before leaving. Not for any procedural reason. Felix waited in the garden and I walked back through the emptying hall alone, past the white chairs being folded and stacked by venue staff who moved with the professional discretion of people paid not to react to things, past the abandoned flowers and the untouched wedding cake on its table, past the string quartet's empty chairs. Soren was sitting alone near the front, his jacket beside him, his hands loose in his lap. He looked up when he heard my footsteps. His face was very still. We looked at each other for a moment. Why did you come back in? He asked. I don't know, I said honestly. I think I wanted to see if there was anything left to say. Is there? I thought about it, about all the years, about the cafe where he had sat down across from me and stolen a sip of my water and said I knew it was you. About his mother's arms and his father's voice and the Sunday dinners and the bar where he had told me I was overthinking. About the person I had believed he was and the person he had turned out to be, and the gap between those two things that I would probably carry for a long time, set down gradually, the way you set down something heavy. I hope you find something real, I said. Whatever that means for you, I genuinely hope that. He said nothing for a moment, then quietly, you always were too decent for your own good. Yes, I said I was. I paused, past tense. I turned and walked back out into the garden. The estate was restored in full, the injunction upheld, and the fraudulent transfer nullified by a civil court on a Tuesday afternoon in November. Felix called me from outside the courthouse, his voice carrying that particular controlled quality that I now understood meant he was actually quite pleased about something. It's done, he said. I was in my studio, standing at the window watching rain move across the city in slow gray sheets. All of it. All of it. The civil judgment is in your favor. The estate is yours legally and completely with costs awarded against the defendants. A pause. Your father's work is safe, Elias. I pressed my hand briefly against the window glass. The cold of it traveled up my palm. Thank you, I said. Come to dinner tonight, he said. Not the restaurant, my apartment, I'll cook. You cook? Competently, he said, which was, I had learned, his word for things he was actually quite good at. 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock, I said. Dorian Marsh was formally charged in Bristol in October. The case was expected to proceed to trial in the spring, with Thomas Whitfield and 2 other plaintiffs joining the prosecution. He had engaged expensive lawyers. It didn't look like it would be enough. Ivy Cole settled a civil claim brought by Thomas Whitfield out of court for a sum that, Felix informed me with professional satisfaction, was significant enough to matter. 2 other individuals had come forward since the wedding. Their cases were proceeding. Soren did not face criminal charges. The evidence of his direct involvement in the fraudulent notarization was circumstantial enough that prosecution was unlikely to succeed, which was its own particular kind of outcome, not justice exactly, but not impunity either. He had lost his position at his property firm. His name had appeared in enough civil filings that certain doors, the kind that close quietly without announcement, had closed. I did not know what he did with his days now. I did not look for it. Margaret and Edmund Cole I thought about sometimes, late at night, in the way you think about things you cannot fully resolve. Whether they knew, whether not knowing was its own kind of knowing. I had no answer. I suspected I would not find one. Felix's apartment at 7 in the evening was warm and smelled of something good from the kitchen. He opened the door in a gray sweater without the jacket or the tie, which was the most informal I had ever seen him, and it struck me how much that meant, that small adjustment. The deliberate setting aside of the professional distance. He poured wine. He cooked competently as promised. We sat at his dining table, the same table where he had spread documents and photographs and the evidence of other people's scheming, now cleared and set simply, candles because the evening was dark and because he was, beneath the litigation precision, someone who paid attention to the quality of light. We talked about my studio, about a new commission I had taken on, a public library in the north of the city, the first significant public project of my career, a building designed around the principle that light should be the primary structural experience. We talked about his cases, one of which he described with the careful opacity of confidentiality and the evident satisfaction of someone who was very good at a thing he believed in. We talked about his brother, the one he had mentioned briefly and never quite said enough about. And I asked more and he told me, and the telling of it was a kind of reciprocal opening. After dinner, we moved to the couch with our wine, and the rain came properly against the windows, and we stayed there talking until it was late. I want to ask you something, I said. Ask. How long have you? I paused, finding the right shape for it. You said you had considerable patience. How long have you been patient exactly? He looked at me for a moment. Something in his expression arranged itself into something more honest than he usually permitted in accessible places. Since the conference room, he said. 6 years ago, you walked in behind your father and you looked at the table full of legal documents like you were already thinking about what they meant for him rather than what they meant for you. A pause. I found that striking. 6 years, I said. I told you, he said, considerable patience. Felix. Yes. That is genuinely quite a lot. Yes, he agreed, it is. I set my wine glass down. I looked at him, at this specific, careful, exasperating, decent person who had waited 6 years and shown up at exactly the moment I needed him and never once made me feel the obligation of it. I think, I said slowly, that the only appropriate response to 6 years of considerable patience is honesty. I would appreciate that, he said. I don't know exactly what this is yet, I said. Between us, there are things I'm still putting down, the grief of it, the specific grief of people who turned out not to exist. I paused. But I know that when I was standing on a kitchen floor holding a letter that rearranged everything, the person I called was you. And I know that every day of the last 3 months, the only part that felt like solid ground was your voice on the phone. I looked at him. That means something. I'm not sure yet what all of it means, but that part I'm certain of. Felix was very still. Then he reached over and took my hand. Not briefly this time, not the glancing touch of steadiness in a difficult room. He took my hand and held it with a deliberateness that was entirely characteristic of him. Everything he did carried that quality of full intention, and he looked at me with those gray eyes that missed very little. That's enough, he said quietly. Elias, that is more than enough. The rain moved against the windows. The candles on the table had burned low. Outside, the city went on in its ordinary, indifferent way, traffic and light and the small, persistent business of other people's evenings. I thought about my father, who had built things slowly and kept them carefully and trusted the right people when he found them. I thought about the kitchen floor and the letter and the cold, specific shock of betrayal, which had been, in its terrible way, the beginning of something I would not have found otherwise. I thought about solid ground and what it means to find it, and how it almost never looks the way you expected. Okay, I said. And I let myself stay. Now please hit that subscribe button. And before you go, like this video has 50 like target, I hope you will don it.